Everybody hear me okay in the back? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all so much for coming to the launch of the Big Bend Seminar Series on energy development. It's a great turnout. We appreciate everybody for taking the time. My name is Lewis Harvison. I'm director of the Borderlands Research Institute, and the Institute is a partner of the Respect Big Bend Coalition, and we're honored to have you here today. As you'll see on the back of the program, we have, this is a series. So there's multiple seminars lined up for the next 3 or 4 months. And then we'll have another 4 seminars in the fall that will be posted when those are known. But right now I want to take some time to thank our sponsors. This initiative is sponsored by the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, the Permian Basin Area Foundation, the Meadows Foundation, and the Stillwater Foundation. And we thank them very much for doing this for West Texas. So thank you very much. We have a great lineup tonight. We have some stellar speakers, and we also have a panel discussion. We're going to start off initially with a little story, backstory about the Respect Big Bend Coalition and where it really came from. Then we're going to migrate over to Dr. Michael Young with the Bureau of Economic Geology, and he's going to break out his crystal ball and tell us a little bit about what we should be expecting here in the Big Bend region. Then we'll have a panel discussion. We have a couple of guests that are going to join the 2 lead speakers, Mr. Mo Morrow, who's a rancher here in Alpine, and Miss Rainer Judd, who's a very active community member in Marfa. So we're again honored to have them. Before we get going, we have some special guests today. First and foremost, we'd like to acknowledge Senator Pete Flores. Senator, if you don't mind come up, I'll say a couple words while you make it your way. So Senator Flores has been a public servant for about 30 years now. He grew up in South Texas, went to Laredo Community College, and then went on to Texas A&M where he graduated. He enlisted with the Texas Game Warden Academy, where he spent 27 years. And when he retired, he held the rank of colonel, which is the highest rank within Texas Parks and Wildlife. Since that time, he has been representing us and fighting the good fight in District 19, which is, he has one of the largest home ranges as a wildlife biologist. He has a really big home range. Covering San Antonio all the way to Brewster County. So we're happy that he's here. And would you like to say some words, Senator? Thank you, Senator. We also have some other dignitaries in the room. We have Superintendent of Big Bend National Park, Bob Kroonemaker, and David Elkowitz, who've been instrumental in getting that park in great shape. And they just celebrated his 75th birthday for the park just a couple of months ago, actually. So happy birthday to Big Bend. We have our own Alpine Mayor, Mr. Andy Ramos here. We have the Sul Ross Provost and Executive Vice President, Dr. Robert Kanukin. And we have some other dignitaries that I know I missed at the door as they came in. So again, thank you all for being here. And that really is a testament, I think, to the challenges of energy development and what that means for the Big Bend. So energy development is essential for a thriving state and a thriving country. Today, the Permian Basin, our neighbors, have the largest play in the world, where over 50% of the oil rigs are in that region specifically. Recent technologies have allowed shale exploration and development in areas that have often been overlooked. The question of if an area will be developed has turned into when an area will be developed. Most recently, the Trans-Pecos has been discovered. We know about the Trans-Pecos pipeline, Alpine High, Delaware Basin. These are all things that are fairly new to us, but we've been experiencing as citizens of this region. As energy creeps basically from the Permian Basin into the Trans-Pecos, it's really getting into an area that is virgin territory for energy development. Even the wind farms in Devil's River are something that aren't necessarily wanted or expected, and we need to find a way to deal and manage these resources that we have. As you'll hear tonight, energy projections suggest that the age of energy development in Trans-Pecos is only at its early stages, so we have opportunity. As energy sprawl creeps into the Trans-Pecos, the wildlife, the natural resources, the iconic communities, and the heritage of the region demand careful consideration. We can't lose sight of what we will sacrifice if we stick with a business-as-usual model as we develop the Trans-Pecos. Tonight, we will discuss the genesis of an initiative called the Respect Big Bend, an attempt to bring more thoughtful development into the planning picture. There are some central tenets that you'll hear throughout the night, including terms like balance and respect and thoughtfulness and responsibility. It's my honor to introduce our first two speakers. I met Mary Lou Hastings and Dr. Michael Young about 2 years ago, and I was invited to witness a little presentation they did in Austin, Texas. They talked about energy development in West Texas, what we're talking about tonight. My home, in a place I hold dear to my heart. It was that day that I knew that I, as well as the institute that I manage, would be involved in this project somehow, some way, to help better prepare landowners and the communities for what could come to us. Our first speaker, I'm going to introduce both speakers, and we'll ask one of them to come up at a time. Our first speaker is Miss Mary Lou Hastings. Through the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, Mary Lou has been the catalyst for Respect Big Bend. Mary Lou is the Vice President of Sustainability Programs for the foundation, where she focuses on clean energy, shale sustainability, water, land conservation, and sustainability education. If you know Mary Lou, you know she is a fearless leader, working in the space where science, public policy, and philanthropic investment collide. Mary Lou's bio, as well as Dr. Young's bio, is in your program. But some of her accomplishments: she is a member of the advisory board of the Energy Institute at University of Texas. She is a member of the University Board of the Bureau of Economic Geology, a member of the Science Advisory Board of Environmental Law and Policy Center in Chicago, a trustee of the Regional Endowment for Sustainability Science, a fellow of Houston Advanced Research Center. And she told us last night why she has sleeping issues, and now I know why. She's also a member of the National Academies of Sciences Roundtable on Science and Technology and Sustainability, and a member of the Academy Roundtable for Unconventional Oil and Gas. Certainly an expert in energy. Our second speaker is Dr. Michael Young. Dr. Young is Associate Director of the Environmental Division of the Bureau of Economic Geology at University of Texas. Dr. Young is responsible for coordinating environmental related research and oversees about 60 staff in his position. He came from the Bureau from the Desert Research Institute, so like us, he is a desert rat there in Nevada. He served most recently as Acting Executive Director for the Division of Hydrological Sciences and a research professor. He has broad experience in administration, research, teaching, and mentorship, and his personal research directions are in hydrology, soil science, and eco-hydrology. Michael is a passionate researcher, a thoughtful speaker, and just eloquent in all levels. We're very, very honored to have both these folks here kick off our seminar series. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mary Lou Hastings, and let's give her a warm West Texas welcome.
Hello. Good evening to everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Lewis, for that long list of things that I forgot that I do. But I'd like to thank Sol Ross, Lewis and Billy for hosting us tonight. I'd like to thank our public officials and elected officials like join Lewis in thanking you all for making it out tonight. I know it's a busy time all over, and for you all to make the effort to come out is particularly valuable for you all to hear some of the information that we have tonight. I like to say that a foundation is only as good as its grantees, and we have a number of grantees many grantees working on the Respect Big Bend program. And we're fortunate that several of them are here tonight, and I'd like to recognize them. David Ionelli is here with Hudson Pacific. He runs our media work and communications work. Of course, you know Billy and Lewis. Melinda Taylor is here from the UT School of Law. Blair Fitzsimmons is here from the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. And of course, Michael Young, you'll hear from in a few minutes. Is there anyone I didn't miss? I missed Kip Averett. Former Senator Kip Averett is not able to make it tonight. He was here earlier today, and he's instrumental in working on our public policy component of RBB, as we affectionately call it. So, is this better? I don't know, Lewis, if you went through this map, but just to clarify, tonight, the Respect Big Bend program that Lewis summarized is an effort that is particularly focused on the Tri-County area highlighted on the map here tonight. And that's what we're talking about in terms of energy development, both fossil fuels and renewables, and their associated infrastructure, including pipelines, roads, and transmission lines. So just to give you a picture of what we're talking about tonight, it's not necessarily the entire Trans-Pecos region from Midland westward. So some of you all may know that, of course, I work for the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation, and now the Mitchells' 10 children and untold numbers of grandchildren. You might know that Mr. Mitchell was an early pioneer in shale development. That has led to the Permian and the United States being the largest producer of oil in the world now. This is a picture, of course, of Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell in Galveston, their home. One impetus for the Respect Big Bend program, and my role here is really to tell you about why the foundation started this whole thing. And one reason was Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell's, but their passion for land conservation, community well-being, and energy development. And in 2012, at the last board meeting that Mr. Mitchell attended of the foundation, he admonished us, me as at the time their only staff person, and their 15 family member board, to address at the time in 2012, so this was 8 years ago, to address at the time the uncharacterized impacts of shale development. Shale development was occurring in places that had not seen oil and gas development before. The Eagle Ford, Utah, areas of Colorado that were becoming urbanized. Of course, it all started in Dallas, and so that urban area knew something about shale development. And of course, West Texas knows all about oil and gas development. But in 2016, we learned that this development was moving westward and southwestern, into new areas that, despite our familiarity with oil and gas in the Permian, it was happening perhaps in areas of the state, of the counties, this region, that hadn't seen development before. So going back to 2012, Mr. Mitchell at the board meeting, in a very Mr. Mitchell kind of way, asked us, and me and the board, to undertake an effort that he called shale sustainability, to try and ensure, to put together an effort to ensure that the benefits of increased use of particularly natural gas to displace carbon dioxide emitting coal, that those environmental and health benefits were maximized, but the environmental risks, increased water use, higher pressures at the wellhead, uses of chemicals that we hadn't seen before, more broadly dispersed areas of development in, again, some sensitive regions around the country that hadn't seen it before, that those impacts were minimized. And that's been sort of our marching orders for 8 years. So flash forward or skip forward again to 2016. And what were we doing in 2016? We had worked on various regulatory efforts related to water and methane emissions from 2012 to 2016. But what did we read in September of 2016 in the Houston Chronicle? We read about the Alpine High. And not to pick on Apache and not to pick on Alpine High, because what we've seen since then is that it's not just the Alpine High. It's development throughout Reeves County, in Pecos, in areas that even in 2012 we're not seeing such intense development. And so I said to myself, literally, what happens in a region like on our map, like where you all live, when oil and gas development comes? What happens to a region like this when the growth of utility scale, being large solar installations and wind, comes to an area that is not used to seeing industrialization? What happens to the communities? What happens to the landscape? What happens to land values? What happens to aesthetics? What happens to ranching heritage culture? What happens to community well-being? What happens when you put a pipeline through to the border of US and Mexico? What happens when you build transmission lines through this region? Some of these activities benefit landowners, and we're all for it. Some of this infrastructure development benefits people in Houston who aren't paying the price of having their land taken through eminent domain for transmission and pipelines. What do you do in a region like this, characterized by small towns with lots of heritage that care deeply about the quality of their land and their well-being and their ability to determine for themselves what they want for their future? So this I ask myself, and why? Why would I do that? Of all the places in all the world that sees energy development, why this? So that's a little bit of a personal story that my friends here asked me to tell you, so I will. I'm from Midland. I grew up there. My dad was a petroleum engineer for ARCO for 35 years. And one of the charming things about growing up in Midland, if your parents will let you, you can get in the car on a Friday afternoon after school, and you can drive with your high school friends 3 hours north and spend the weekend up to no good in Paladura Canyon. Or you can drive west and create problems in the Guadalupes, or you can drive south and wreak havoc in the Big Bend National Park. And that's what we did while I was in high school. And I basically grew up, because we have a family ranch in Castro County in the Panhandle, I grew up going up and down Highway 385. So this region to me is deeply personal. My late husband and I spent our honeymoon out in the Big Bend National Park. We took the overnight train from Houston. My daughter, who just texted me, and I thought I shut that down. I did shut it down, but somehow she got through me anyway. Her name is Elena. She's very obnoxious right now. Her name's Elena, and she's named after St. Helena Canyon in the national park. So there are other stories that I could tell you about growing up out here and what it means to me to be the daughter of a petroleum engineer and having worked for the developer of shale technology for now 24 years and his family, to understand the value that clean energy, being natural gas or renewables, creates for the world, but the threats that it presents at the local level, and some at the global level too, in terms of climate change, if you are interested in that. But it creates opportunities for communities to have new opportunities for economic development, for landowners and mineral owners to prosper, for communities to have new resources, new infrastructure, new buildings, new hospitals, schools, etc. But the question is, and it remains, and what the RBB's sort of mission is, you all want to determine your future. You're self-determination kind of people. What science, information, data, I don't know, community outreach, training, what do you all need so that if, and we are not preparing anyone for inevitable energy development, Michael will tell you it may or may not come here. What information do you need that we can help provide at the foundation so that you can determine what's right for your communities, for your land, and for your friends, for your children? What do you need so that when energy comes knocking, you know what questions to ask, you have information, you can see what lessons have been learned in other regions that have suffered, grown, and suffered from boom and bust. I've seen firsthand the inflation in a community and a family and the dissolution of that community and that family in the bust period. My own dad was laid off in 1985. The golden parachute thing that just happened last week. It's still happening. 1985, it's still happening. 85 wasn't the first time, and this year won't be the last. What do we need to learn? And I think that I am committed that this region has so much to lose. I think more than any other region where oil and gas or renewables has ever been developed in the entire world. This region, where we are today, and you all have more to lose and more to gain by doing it right. So that's what our program's about. We at the foundation are committed to helping, and that begins with stakeholder and community engagement that Lewis and Billy are doing. It begins with communications that David and them are doing. But most importantly, because we're a science-based organization, it begins with science and data, and that's really about Michael Young and the Bureau. So with that, I will show you a trailer.
Trans-Pecos is iconic Texas.
Wide open spaces and rugged individualism.
You see stars differently out there. It really is like you're leaving into a different world. From a landowner and a ranching perspective, very self-reliant, more a fabric of their DNA.
It's known as one of the most biodiverse regions in the country, potentially in the world.
We still have intact ecosystems, and we still have these large ranches and these beautiful vistas and the dark skies. So it's coveted properties.
And what's happening now is that the character of that landscape is markedly changing.
The Permian Basin oil field yielded almost 30 billion barrels of oil and 75 trillion cubic feet of natural gas.
When you look at all the different plays that are there, is one of the biggest reservoirs in the world.
There are more and more wind turbines, very large solar facilities, transmission lines, pipelines, new roads, and infrastructure. It's an industrialized landscape.
We gained 7 motels in 18 months.
The area of Midland, Odessa is trying to keep up with housing. 2-bedroom apartments costing more than $2,000 a month, and some say that's not even the start of it.
These small communities have never seen anything like it.
You don't really see it until you're in the middle of it, and sometimes that's too late.
The impact is happening predominantly to families who have been on the land for generations.
You know, the growing footprint from energy to meet our ever-growing demand for energy. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge we have to recognize.
There's this whole national narrative right now on the value and the impacts of natural gas and oil versus renewables. All of that is now centered in West Texas.
As we develop new innovations, this same issue is going to come to communities across the nation.
Once you get it wrong, it's really hard to go back. That's what many of us fear will happen if the status quo is followed.
What we're doing with the Mitchell Foundation has the potential to be a template for energy development around the world.
We need to rethink everything. I hope that we have started soon enough.
So just like magic, here he is in the flesh. Please help me welcome Michael Young.
Thank you. I'm going to talk to Lewis about never following Mary Lou again, just as a note. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's a pleasure for me to be here to talk with you and to kind of talk a little bit about the science work that we're doing at the Bureau and that others are doing. So some of the folks that you saw on the video are with the Nature Conservancy with Sulla Ross. We're known lovingly as the Nerd Herd. And we're underpinning the science work that's being done on the project. And I just want to kind of start, and I think Mary Lou really teed it up well, that you know, we're really looking at all types of energy systems, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's wind and solar. All of them have some environmental impact. There's no free lunch, you know, all different types of electricity, natural gas, oil, all of these things have some impact. And the bubbles that you're seeing here, it's kind of hard to read from in the back, but the larger the bubble, the larger the land impact. And we're looking at how much energy is being produced and how much land is being used. So the small bubbles, actually on the bottom right is coal, which has the smallest footprint of nearly any energy source that we have outside of nuclear. And it's because coal is so dense, it has a very high energy density. And solar has a much lower energy density, so it takes more land in order to generate the same amount of power. And so we're studying the land footprint of all the different energy systems side by side in West Texas to get a sense of what's likely to happen in the future, what could happen in the future, and how much land is going to be kind of dedicated to it. And so I have an approach here. We are really looking at trying to essentially looking at recent trends. For example, the unconventional which is unconventional energy, which many of you are very familiar with, is horizontal drilling coupled with hydraulic fracturing. These are known as tight rocks or shale rocks. We've been looking at the trends over the last 10 years. It's about how long really industrial scale hydraulic fracturing and exploration has been occurring. How has that been changing in different parts of the play? Mary Lou showed you the map of much of West Texas with the Tri-County area. And so we spoke as the Nerd Herd, and we decided that we would look at all of the land area because we weren't really sure, you know, once you hit the GIS button, it's relatively straightforward to increase your area. But we know that this project is really focused on the Tri-County area. What are we expecting? And so we've been looking at these trends. Are we getting more energy development per square kilometer, per square mile, or is it going down? How can that inform us about what the future might look like going forward? And then from there, we can start estimating based on these trends, and we have access to the Railroad Commission databases. Where has energy been produced and where likely is it going to be in the future? And so this map here, you can see the whole area. All the green dots are existing wells. The red lines are the geologic boundaries of the different basins in the Permian Basin. So on the left, I don't know where my little thingy is. I know I'm going to mess this up. But this is the Delaware Basin. Over to the west, you see that that little tongue that sticks out next to Alpine. That's the southwest side of it. It goes all the way to Balmorhea and into New Mexico. And that's just a geologic boundary that the Bureau and geologists have been studying for decades. And you can see where all the wells are located. You can see the dark outline of the Tri-Counties with almost very, very few wells drilled in the Tri-County area because the Delaware Basin doesn't really extend into Jeff Davis, Brewster, and Presidio counties. And so we were looking at those wells. How much oil and gas are they being produced? Can we use that as a way of just saying, hey, if it's increasing, there's more likely to be wells drilled in the future? And the little graph on the right that shows Pecos City, you can see the darker colors have an increasing trend in energy development. These are areas that we expect, if there's going to be more drilling, we expect that they would be in these locations. And the lower colors, the gray colors, production has been low, and we would expect energy companies to be less likely to go there. So we're using these trends as a way of doing it, informing, and our approach here is to look at how many well pads are going to be constructed. We're not as interested in the number of wells. We're looking at the pads themselves. Each one is about 3.5 acres in size, and they can accommodate multiple wells. So these are known as pad drilling, stack drilling, cube drilling. There's lots of different terms for it. How many wells per pad are going to be on there? How many pads do we think are going to be constructed in the future? And just to get to the punchline, so this graph here shows what we sort of anticipate with what we are calling a medium scenario. This is, we call it the business as usual scenario, where we have 3 wells per pad. And that's about where operators seem to be heading toward. Having too many wells per pad is very, very costly. A lot of operators are trying to get return on investment sooner. 1 well per pad is very expensive because the rigs have to be moved around. And so 3 is sort of the Goldilocks of the number of wells on there. And we're looking in here, and the units is about the percent per square kilometer that we would expect direct impact. In other words, the 3.5 acre pad. And you can see the darker colors are more intense development, and the lighter colors are less intense. Very little in the Tri-County, just a little bit to the northeast of Alpine, but for the most part, we don't see a lot of oil and gas development with current technology in the foreseeable future in the Tri-County area. And on the right side are what we're calling edge impacts. So from an ecosystem standpoint, or from a habitat standpoint, we add a little bit of a buffer outside of the drill pad, outside of the well pad. And from there, we can then calculate, is there going to be other impacts to vegetation, to habitats, to the kinds of migration areas and pathways that animals are using. And this is work that's being done by the Nature Conservancy and by Sul Ross. So together, these give us a sense of how much area are we talking about. And if we add all this up across the entire area, that's about 18,000 square kilometers of land, or about 4.5 million acres. To give you just a rough estimate in terms of what the acreage is looking like. If we have a high development scenario with fewer wells per pad, that number goes up and scales to a larger number. So in dealing with West Texas, and Lewis is right, I've spent more than half my life in the desert. I'm a desert rat. Although I was born in Maine, I got out to the desert as quickly as I could because there's no trees and you have nice vistas. But trying to restore desert lands is extremely difficult to do, and ironically, it's because you need the water, and we have that's the least we have. So trying to understand where the development could occur allows us to think about what the restoration would look like so that the land can return to the same activities that you all are using on your lands now, whether it's hunting, ranching, whether it's you're just looking for dark skies and open spaces, right? That's That's the idea, is bringing the land back and having and sort of mitigating impact and restoring the land. We were asked by the Stakeholder Advisory Group, are there wells drilled outside of the Delaware Basin? And the answer is yes. There's been quite a few wells drilled outside of the Delaware Basin, and you can see all those dots outside all of the, and that list over there is the sort of the basin, the geologic basin that's known for where the wells are. And the vast majority of those wells came up dry. There's very small amounts of production that would tell us, if we were to look into the future using current technologies, that there's less likely to be a lot of energy development out here. We know of the Helios play in northwest Presidio County. That's about a 65,000 acre lease. There is some production out there. It's difficult to know how extensive that's going to be in the future. The geologists that I work with at the Bureau, they don't see really large reservoirs that would warrant the kinds of energy development that you're seeing in Reeves and Pecos and all the way up into New Mexico. We do a lot of work on the water side. My group at the Bureau, we run the seismicity, the TexNet seismological network. So we're doing a lot of work on earthquake monitoring and understanding West Texas. Much of that is coming from wastewater disposal. And what you're looking at here is how much water we expect to be generated. It's about 10 trillion gallons over the next 30 years. It's 1 million acre feet a year, to give you a sense of the scale. Right now, 95% of the water or so is being injected through disposal wells. The water is very salty. Desalinating and reusing the water outside of the oil fields has been a challenge. A lot of work is going on to do that. And so my colleague Bridget Scanlon, who some of you may know, myself working on the land piece, we look at the energy piece together, gives us a much stronger and more comprehensive picture of what's happening out here in West Texas. And so it gives us a better sense of the full scope of things. To the point I was making before, and Lewis and Mary Lou did, we are not focusing on oil and gas, we're focusing on all energy. And that includes wind and solar. So we are projecting how many wind turbines might be installed, how many utility scale solar fields might be installed, how many transmission lines are expected. We have a hard time going too far into the future because these are all governed by ERCOT, who is the grid operator, and they're really only able to look several years, 2 to 3 years in advance, based on when a company comes in with a permit and says, hey, we would like to connect to your power lines, and here's where we would like to connect to. Until ERCOT gets those permit applications, they have a difficult time with their crystal ball knowing where this is going to occur. But just to give you a sense, this is wind development. This is 2020, so this is this year. We just downloaded this graphic last week, so this is at the end of December of last year. We're expecting another probably 3,000 to 4,000 turbines to be installed in Texas over the next 3 years, all the way from the Panhandle all the way south. Very few, if any, would be installed in our Tri-County area that we showed before. And this is all information that's publicly available. We look at this fairly closely. We work with ERCOT, and they work with us. They would like to know where oil and gas is going to be, because they have to install power lines to service the oil field. So they're interested in working with us, and we would like to talk with them about issues like this. If we look at solar, big jump in solar, all the way up from, that's 3,100 megawatts, and it goes all the way up to about 6,000 megawatts. To give you a sense of how much land that is, there's about 10 acres per megawatt. So this is 60,000 acres of land. Some of that is, and that's spread out across the state. About a third of that is in West Texas, and a bunch of that is in Pecos County. So we're looking at this as often as we can to understand where companies are planning to go. We would like to work with the companies to reduce the impact as they install utility scale solar. And but the idea here is that once we know what the size is, we know where it's going to be, we can begin to think about how do you mitigate any land impacts if it's going to be installed. And I have colleagues in Nevada where I was teaching before at UNLV that are working with some of the largest solar fields in the country, the 750 megawatt type of solar fields. And they're doing that while maintaining the desert ecosystems and keeping the land productive at the same time. So there are things that we can do here in Texas and in West Texas, knowing all of these, what these numbers are. As I mentioned before, it's really hard to project where the turbines are going to go, but we can identify areas that are favorable for wind, and these tend to be windy areas. I mean, it's no secret. If you really want to put a turbine in there, it has to be windy. And so we look, the U.S. Department of Energy publishes these maps that are known as wind energy density maps. And it's sort of the darker the color, the more dense and more windy the area is, and it would be more favorable for turbines. At the same time, if you're on a really steep slope like a mountain, well, you really can't install a lot of wind turbines on the sides of mountains. So it has to be relatively flat and windy at the same time. And so we're mapping out these areas where we think it meets those types of criteria. And you can see where the turbines are already located, right? And you see this all the time because you're out there driving and you see these. And the gray line here, I wish I had a pointer. This here is known as the McCamey-Krez, which is the competitive renewable energy zone. Oh, excellent. Excellent, thank you. So this line here is which is essentially what's known as the competitive renewable energy zone, or CREZ, is essentially legislated by the Ledge, and is essentially an area where ERCOT is encouraging companies to place their electricity generating facilities so that they can eventually be connected up to power lines. So if you're talking about areas that are really outside of the CREZ, that requires more permitting and more assessments, and it's more effort for the company. So we see these as being more likely. You can see certainly all of these little dots here are inside the CREZ now. And of course, you know, if you want to have solar, you need sun. Again, there's no big secret there. And but you also need to have relatively flat slopes that face to the south, because that sun is coming in and striking in from the south. We don't want to have it on really steep slopes, and we don't want to have it too high in elevation. So all of these areas, like these areas right in here, are too high in elevation to where there's likely to be any solar. So lower elevations in the valleys on flat land, relatively flat, facing the south, those are areas that are favorable for solar, really larger solar. I mean, these are the several thousand acre type of facilities. And you can see where these things are located, basically outside of Fort Stockton and to the south. But in the end, we're really not sure where they are. We sort of have to wait and be reactive a little bit. And through this project, we may be able to help guide that a little bit. All of this requires pipelines and power lines. We have lots of discussions about this. I'm sure as you're driving around, you're seeing new power lines. So we just downloaded the image today. My colleague at UT, I said, hey, where's the latest, transmission line graphic? And he whipped it up and emailed, and we put it in here an hour ago. And you can see the power lines. These are these purple lines. One goes down to Presidio. Certainly outside of Alpine, we're already seeing this. It's hard to imagine installing a power line without expectation of renewable energy. We don't know when, we don't know what, but there's a power line out there. We expect something's going to be connected to it. By having this and working with ERCOT, we may be able to anticipate this in some ways, and that's kind of what the goal is. Of course, you see this huge dense network of pipelines. Again, the Trans-Pecos pipeline right there that you're seeing, and then other pipelines. I understand there's 4 or 5 pipeline projects leaving the Permian Basin and heading east and south to Corpus and across the hill country over to Houston. So these are all things that you are immersed with. We are looking at this as well. We're trying to get our arms around it as conditions are changing. How are we going to use this? What's going to be the point of all this? And we are the Nerd Herd. My colleagues we are looking at a variety of different what we would call land values. These are things that the Stakeholder Advisory Group has helped us to define. What is important to you all? Is it dark skies? Is it open spaces? Is it ranching heritage? Is it ecosystems? What are those things that we would then be able to generate maps like this and then overlay that on top of where we expect the energy development? We're not trying to say this is where it's going to happen. We're not trying to say this is not where it should happen. We're just trying to use that as a sort of a look ahead for what could happen. And then from that, we can then start having the discussions with landowners, with companies, to avoid areas that might have that higher value, or to more carefully place where infrastructure is, so that the land values are maintained today and into the future when the oil fields are gone, or the solar installations are removed, things like that. So these are all things that we're working on quite a bit. I would say that all of these take coffee, and so I'm kind of done. This is my joke slide here, and this is my favorite coffee shop, which is the Garage in Fort Stockton. I make sure to hit it every time, and then coffee shops here in Alpine. So, and this is actually taken, that's not a thermonuclear explosion. This is actually a sunset taken from the parking lot at Sul Ross a couple of meetings ago. With that, I'm going to stop because somebody else is coming up, I think. Is it Billy coming up next? Okay, and so I look forward to questions and discussions, and thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Michael. By the way, we're holding off on questions until we get to the end of the panel discussion. We'll have plenty of time there. I knew this was going to happen. All of us are running a little long, and I tend to, as y'all, many in the audience know me, that's not what you want to hear, is me talk for a while. So I'm going to try to go through this pretty quick. But I think it's one of the most important things we're going to talk about, and that's community engagement. And what does this mean for all of us? So how do we affect change? Well, not build knowledge. Mary Lou talked about that. Build a knowledge base and design informational materials. That's what we want to build, that knowledge base both within Respect Big Bend and with y'all. Provide information assistance to empower landowners and communities so that they can make appropriate decisions. Good decisions are good for business and good for their families, etc. Stakeholder outreach. Engage the energy industry, local stakeholders, regulators, and the public. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but as long as we're engaging like we're doing now, continue to try to do, the more information is out there, the more folks that have knowledge, the better off we are. I put down here development by design. Facilitate a community-based regional planning process to guide energy development and conservation. We'll talk in a second about that a little bit further. Engaging community will yield the best outcomes. This is the only way to build broad, sustained support. If you look at where we meet there between community values, potential impacts, and mitigation, there's a sweet spot where we can all find balance. I'll just let y'all read through that for a second. I don't want to get too much into it because I can spend a little too much time in it, but the bottom line is our efforts are apolitical, nonpartisan. This is not trying to affect a regulatory change. Our efforts are, this data could be used down the road possibly for that, but not by this group. Our efforts here are just to build collaboration and cooperation and knowledge. Try to achieve a balance. Excuse me. And I want to take 1 second here to talk about a couple of things. And we talk about balance for all these stakeholders, right? Regulators, industry, landowners, public, communities, and others. I want to be clear that first of all, there are we're not deciding what will happen on the land. There's only three entities, three stakeholders that can actually decide what's going to happen. Landowners, mineral owners, they're the ones that work the deal with the energy company, the industry itself. So it's landowners, industry, and regulators affect what happens on a particular site. Our goal is to keep engaged with those individuals at a high level so that they understand the values that you all cherish and make appropriate decisions that take those into account. The second thing is we've been accused as of late of maybe sounding like it's a done deal. It's inevitable. It's not. Any particular landowner or mineral owner can decide they don't want to develop on their particular property, but that's their decision. That's their private property right. So all we're trying to do is prepare them when those decisions have to be made. How you do that? You build trust. You build trust between all these stakeholders. Every one of these are extremely important. And we start by building trust locally, like we're trying to do now, or like we do within our stakeholder advisory group, and also at a statewide level. Regulators, politicians. I can tell you that your elected officials at the state level are all aware of this. Your governor's office has been briefed. They're aware of this effort, and they've been supportive because it's community-based and it's collaborative, cooperative. So the key steps to making this happen. This is based upon a Nature Conservancy program called Development by Design, which I mentioned a while ago. The idea behind it, I think Michael alluded to, is create a conservation vision. What are the values? You build the conservation vision based on the values that we all hold and cherish. Put that in a spatial situation so you can actually see it to the best of our ability on the landscape. Project future development. We just saw Michael talk about that. You see where those two line up, how it lines out, and to quote Dr. Joe Kiesinger with the Nature Conservancy, and if they don't line up and there's no significant, if the energy development's not going to have any major impact on your values, then or conservation values or cultural values, then maybe we're done. That said, I think we can see where these projections can change, our technologies can change. So obviously anything we do can't be stagnant. It has to be dynamic. It will continue for some time. The Mitchell Foundation's committed to making that happen, as are others. So when you find out there are going to be impacts, there's going to be situations where your values could be impacted by development, then we have to apply appropriate mitigation actions. What that basically means is figure it out. Let's find solutions and make the best decisions possible, because energy development can be good for communities. It can certainly be good for landowners from a financial standpoint. And what's been refreshing me through this whole process is the landowners of the Trans-Pecos cherish the exact same things that we all do. These open vistas, this wide open space, they cherish it as well, but sometimes financial decisions have to be made. And when we can provide them the best tools and resources to make those decisions, and they understand what we all value as well as them, I think it's a great situation, and that's why I'm pretty passionate about it. So my job with the Borderlands Research Institute is stakeholder engagement, and we've been working hard at that. We recently had a landowner workshop in this same room, one of our best attended ever. We're going to continue to try to engage landowners, provide them the tools and resources that they need to make the best decisions possible from a legal standpoint, understanding what development can do to the property, both good and bad, from an economic standpoint, moving forward down the road. Is this a good idea or not? But I will say this: ultimately, it's their decision, and it's not ours. It's theirs. Community members, like we're doing right now, this is our opportunity to engage y'all, get some feedback from y'all, so we see how you feel about the direction we're moving. We've been reaching out to civic groups, community groups, quite a bit, presenting in front of them, community leaders. We've reached out to our local elected officials significantly, county commissioners courts, et cetera, visited with them. Our conservation partners, we have some great conservation partners out here. They've all been briefed. We continue to engage them at a high level. And ultimately industry. Industry's in the room. They're one of our stakeholders, and they have to be part of our efforts, both renewables and oil and gas. We've picked some individuals from some reputable companies to put on our stakeholder advisory group that tend to try to do business in the right way. And that's important for us because we need to understand, number one, if we come up with ideas of how we might be able to form solutions. If it's not economically feasible, then they're not going to do it. And second of all, the really good ones tend to have a community engagement process. And we're going to take that same process that they might do on a particular site, and we're going to expand it for our entire region. And they appreciate that. They will utilize, I believe and know that they will utilize that information. Ultimately, our stakeholder advisory group that we've assembled is our biggest driver, I guess, as far as determining our values that we all share, and also helping form this vision. That's 17 individuals from different stakeholders from across the Tri-County area, with landowners, community members, community leaders, like I mentioned, industry, elected officials, to help drive this process. And they have already met 4 times. Here's a little bit more information about them. They're from Brewster, Jeff Davis, Presidio counties. Their goal is to help us create a shared conservation vision, identify the values that we all cherish, and I'll talk about those in a second. Compare those values, like I mentioned a while ago, to energy projections. They'll be part of that process as well, and then prioritize opportunities to avoid or minimize impacts. It's a hard lift. They've already met 4 times. We're going to meet again over the next year, a little over a year and a half, or close to a year and a half, possibly, with several more meetings, long meetings. I know they get tired of it, but it's important. And I will say this: of the 17 individuals that we selected for this, they were selected for a reason, because they engage and they help make things better for us. They've been involved in a lot of efforts at the community level. They're those type of people, and they're busy, super busy. And not a single one said no. Every one of them we asked said yes. This is important. They want to be part of the process. So, on to the values. At the very top of the values that our stakeholder advisory group has identified is ranching heritage and private property rights. It's imperative, number one, from a private property rights standpoint, that we don't do anything or even appear to do anything that would infringe on private property rights. Those decisions are protected by the Constitution. And so that's number one. And at the end of the day, if you all think about it, everything we cherish about this land, everything we cherish about our communities, in some way, form, or fashion, is based upon our ranching heritage. We're so rich with this ranching heritage, these large working lands that we enjoy, that we look at, that provide clean water, clean air, wildlife habitat. They actually transcend, that ranching heritage transcends all these other values. Tourism and hunting, those are 2 economic drivers, significant, both to individual landowners and to communities as well. View sheds and vistas, dark skies, remoteness, quietness, those things that we all know, and that's why we're here. That's why we live here. Sky islands, water resources, grasslands, some of the more important ecological features on the landscape that the stakeholders felt that were important. Wildlife and migratory corridors. Community, safety, quality of life. The things that could potentially be impacted by significant energy development. Culture, music, and art. Once again, I think all these in some way go back to ranching heritage. I'll say that the idea here is, and I didn't put this in here because we're not necessarily focusing on landowners, but our goals, the tools and resources we can provide landowners are a myriad of things. And it's important that we continue to have those conversations with industry and landowners, and that they're at the table with us, and that they understand what we as a community, as you as a community, feel. And I think that I see no reason this will not be successful. I will just finish on that note.